Okay. Are we still friends? Like, are we
We'll
still
see.
having dinner after this?
We'll see.
Okay.
Let's see how it goes.
So, if we switch over to Meghan's slides, I just wanted to say a couple of things about her. So, Meghan is the only person that I know that has ever been retweeted by The Rock, by Dwayne The Rock Johnson. And
Do you want me to move forward? So I tweeted him.
oh yeah, this is it. So she tweeted at him, and he retweeted her. And this is why I like Meghan and why she's an inspiration to me, is because she's just so super cool about it. I would be too. But yeah, so Meghan, welcome back.
Thank you.
Take it away.
All right. Thank you. Yes. So Shahina said, oh, I want to introduce you, and would you just take a couple slides and put them at the beginning of your deck? And I said, yeah. And then she just showed me what the slides were, and I was like, I'm so excited because this was like the pinnacle of my life so far. Like, I really did want to go home. I was on site at a client, and my phone buzzed, and I looked at it, and I just set my phone down, and I like pushed my chair away from the desk, put both my hands in the air, and was like, you will not believe what just happened to me. And I'm in this very like straight-laced corporate environment, and they didn't appreciate it quite as much as I did. But it was pretty great. Okay, well, hi. Thanks for having me back. As Shahina mentioned, I was here in 2015 with Nancy Lyons, who's here somewhere, or should be. Oh, there she is. There's Nancy. She's the one I sent the spam to, who gave me my first job in Interactive. So she and I were here in 2015. And one thing I realized during Roishi's talk about empathy and sort of taking care of yourself and all of that, and just being sort of honest and open with people, I realized that the talk that I gave here in 2015 was the last keynote that I gave until just a couple months ago when I keynoted the DPM Summit in Las Vegas, which is where Shahina and I reconnected. So when I came here, I'll fast forward to this slide actually. So that's me, I'm Irish Girl on Twitter. Not real Irish, obviously, American Irish, you know how we are. We reconnected at the Vegas conference. When I spoke here in 2015, that previous October, my dad had died. And then a month later, my brother-in-law died. And so when I was here that January, I was like in this state of just confusion and grief. Like I just had gone through so much. And I realized after that speaking for me had stopped becoming something that was like exciting and fun, and like I wanted to share things with people. It had become this like thing that caused just intense anxiety. And so I took about 3 years off from speaking. And so I'm excited to be back. I gave that talk in Vegas. It was a lot of fun. It felt different. And I thought, okay, like I've healed a little bit. I've taken care of myself. And now I'm ready to do this again. So when Shahina invited me to come here, I was so excited because even though I was in that kind of foggy state of grief, I remember this community and the feeling of this conference and the feeling of this room. And it's so positive and so enjoyable. And I've been able to connect with a couple people who were here 3 years ago. So thank you for having me back. I'm glad to be here. The other reason I mention all of that stuff with my dad and my brother-in-law is I also want to give a brief plug for Still Kickin', which is a nonprofit that my sister founded. So before her husband died, actually, he had brain cancer. And we found out he had brain cancer because he had a seizure when he was at work. And so he went to the hospital, and then they realized, like, oh, he's got this brain tumor. And the day that he had the seizure, he was wearing this shirt that he bought at a thrift store that said Still Kickin' on it, and he's a big football fan. And you almost heard me say soccer, and then I corrected myself. He's a big football fan, and so he had a very dark sense of humor, and he thought it was absolutely hilarious that he was wearing a Still Kickin' shirt when he got a terminal diagnosis. So he was an art director. He recreated the shirt, and then we started selling it to raise money for brain cancer research. And then after he died, we expanded the scope of the nonprofit to really help anyone who was going through something difficult. So stillkickin.co or stillkickin.co on Twitter. It's an awesome nonprofit. That's where I've been putting a lot of my energy over the last 3 years. So yeah, that's that. Thank you for having me back. So a little bit about kind of what I'm going to talk about in my career path. So today I want to talk about how each of us can show up as leaders in our everyday jobs. And I feel like thematically you've heard some of that throughout the day already, this idea that what we're doing is leadership. But I think sometimes it's hard to connect that concept of like showing up as a leader when it's not literally on your business card, or when you're not in a position of actual power in whatever organization or on whatever team that you're on. So I want to talk about today how you can show up as a leader even when you feel like that's not what you are or who you are. So I mentioned during the panel kind of a little bit about my career path. So I started as an account executive kind of on the marketing side, and then I moved into digital and interactive. I've been a project manager. My business card has said creative director, producer, managing director, COO. But what I realized when I look at all of those things that I was doing, aside from the fact that I was just figuring it out as I go, as I mentioned also in the panel, like we're all just figuring it out, was that what brought me to the next thing that I did was my ability to show up as a leader that I didn't recognize at the time, but now looking back, I can see. And so I want to share a little bit of that with you. And then as a result of a lot of that experience, wrote a book with Nancy called Interactive Project Management, which really seeks to lay out like what is the job of project management and how can we think about a way of delivering for our clients that pulls in the many different elements of the way that we work. So agile methodology, like what are the pieces of waterfall that are actually helpful or that a client has a hard time letting go of, and how can we weave these many things together in addition to the more creative, like what I think of as the agency process, which is very creative driven. So how can we weave all of those things together? So that's a book. I wrote it with Nancy. You can buy it. Okay, so a little SOW for our next like 40-ish minutes together. We're gonna talk about showing up as a leader. I wanna give you 4 assumptions, 2 definitions, and 8 features of a leader. So this is like our leadership MVP. So let's start with 4 assumptions. So the first thing that I assume in this presentation is that you're good at your job. And by that I mean just the everyday mechanics of your job. I'm not gonna talk about the specifics of what makes you good at your role, whether that's creating a timeline or holding a meeting. Like the basics of your job are absolutely critical to being seen as a leader. You can't be seen as a leader without actually just satisfactorily completing what is actually in your job description. So I am assuming in this presentation that you're good at that stuff. And if you're not, find ways to get good at it, right? Conferences like these, going to workshops, asking peers, like find ways to grow your skills. But if you feel wobbly in this area, don't yet try to show up as a leader. First, nail all of the essential aspects of your job and your role. Second assumption is a quote from Dale Carnegie: dealing with people is probably the biggest problem you face, especially if you're in business. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dale Carnegie. He wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. He wrote this quote in 1936. So our problem with people is not new. People have always been hard. And you know, Roishi said computers are hard too. They are. But like people are, I think, a different level of hard. Because we think of ourselves as being very rational beings, and we're not. We're all just like hurricanes of feelings bouncing off each other all the time, right? Despite the way that we may see ourselves as being very logical. So assumption number 2 is it's really important that you have to deal with people and they're hard to deal with. So assumption number 3 is that most studies of on-the-job performance, and this is specifically engineering related, have established that all of the emotional, intelligent sort of competencies are more important in our job performance than our cognitive abilities or our technical expertise. And so much of the time we focus on whether we know what we're talking about, whether we're right, and not on this like communication, interpersonal skills, our own self-control. And yet it's absolutely essential. It is more important to our success than just knowing what we're doing, which is why assumption number 1, I'm not gonna tell you how to do the things that you need to do, because that's in the Dale Carnegie book. He actually gives a statistic that says about 15% of your success is related to kind of the cognitive side of things, and 85% is related to emotional competencies. I didn't include it because I thought a stat from 1936, might not be modern enough, but it's been underscored in more modern times as well. And then our fourth assumption is that when it comes to leadership, especially in our industry, but really across the board, there's not necessarily a clear career path. So you don't need to follow this whole thing. This is just like a map of a summary of what my career path has looked like, right? So I went from, I went to school, then I left school, then I went back to school, then I was a Montessori teacher. I thought I was gonna be an elementary teacher for a while. Then I was in marketing. So it's just like I've kind of meandered around through my career. And I think it's important to share that with people because I think often it's tempting for us to look at someone in a leadership position and assume that they had a plan. And some people do. I was at a talk a couple of years ago, and the woman who was speaking was the chief administrative officer of Best Buy. And so she did CFO stuff and ops stuff. And she was so intense. And she had previously worked at like Williams-Sonoma. She's a very like high-powered woman. She was so intense about like her planning and how consciously she planned out her career path that she said, anytime I've considered a new role, I've put it onto my resume to see like what story does that tell. And I was like, whoa. Okay, I am the exact opposite of that. Like in many ways, like I'm a great project manager, I'm kind of a type A person, but that's even intense for me. My career path has been much more like a pinball machine, right? It's just like, I don't know, I kind of follow my gut. The story I told you earlier about like, I just had a feeling in my gut that a job from Nancy was the thing I needed. Like that, it just was it. There was no like logic or, a 5-year plan. And I want you guys to know that because it is possible to succeed without knowing what the hell you're gonna do 2 years from now or 5 years from now. I have no idea what I'm gonna do 2 or 5 years from now. So it's okay. There's rarely a clear path, and so we have to forge it on our own. And I wanna talk to you a little bit about how we forge that path for ourselves. So to summarize, you're good at your job, people are hard to deal with, and yet dealing with people is critical to our success, and there's rarely a clear path to leadership. Everything's fine. This is easy. We're gonna do this. So then let's move on to the 2 definitions I wanna give you. So as I was thinking about leadership and management, I wanted to boil down how I define leadership and management to just the most essential description. And I've worked with some of my colleagues on this as well at Clockwork, so this is what I've boiled it down to. Leaders inspire people to move toward a vision, and managers make sure we all get there. Both mindsets are really essential to successful delivery. You need the person, and sometimes it can be the same person, but you need both of these mindsets. You need the person who lights that fire in your heart that says, I wanna go there. I wanna go there with you. Whether or not you know how you're gonna do it, you're just like, yes, let's do this. Then you also need the manager who's like, yes, we are going there. And here are your snacks, and here's your map, and here are all of the things that you actually need to get there. So you gotta have the fire in your belly to wanna go, and you also need all of your supplies. And you need both of those roles or those mindsets working in harmony to get to where it is you actually wanna go. I want to, in the context of this, also separate the idea that a leader means someone who is like in charge, who has this like lofty title, and that a manager is necessarily like the person who's like bossing you around. I'm talking about leadership and management kind of conceptually, not necessarily related to job title. And I just want to point that out because I think when we get caught up in leadership and management as a job title, we exclude ourselves from showing up in that way in whatever role that we do have. And I think we all have the ability to show up with one of these 2 viewpoints in the product teams or project teams that we're working in. So if you were at the talk in 2015, almost every talk I do has some reference to Lord of the Rings. Like, I just can't help myself. It's just the greatest story ever told. And so when I thought about how do I conceptualize a leader versus a manager, I was like, well, this is perfect. Lord, everyone seen The Lord of the Rings? I will just spend the next hour recapping quickly what happens. No. So if you think about what happens in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is the person who brings everybody together and says, there is a problem. Like, there's something big going on, and I'm going to bring together this group of people with very different backgrounds, very different viewpoints, and I'm going to rally them toward this single cause, right? And if you think about the Fellowship of the Ring, classic product team, right? Really, it's like everybody's got like a different way of thinking about it, everybody brings a different skill, but Gandalf has this ability to get all of these people who otherwise would be fighting to say, yes, I'm in, let's do this. And then what happens after Gandalf leaves? Everything falls apart, right? Like all of a sudden, like Sean Bean gets shot in the woods because he's trying to steal the ring, and it's chaos, it's madness, the whole thing falls apart. And over time, what happens as Sam and Frodo kind of break off from the group is that Sam emerges as the manager. Okay, first of all, that backpack is amazing. He's got everything. Everything you're gonna need, Sam's got it. He's got a blanket, he's got Lembas bread that never runs out, he's got like all the things, okay? He's got everything you need. And he emerges as the person who helps Frodo get done what he needs to get done. And there's this beautiful quote in the movie, gets me every time, where he says to Frodo about the ring, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. And I think that is just a beautiful metaphor for what a really good team manager does. Whether your title is literally project manager or not, that role is the person who makes the rest of the team feel like, I can't do your work for you, but I can carry you with emotionally appropriate boundaries and giving them back to you in a box when you're done, okay? So, Frodo as manager, Gandalf as leader, you can sort of keep that in your mind as we move through this. So I believe, quoting myself, it's very humble, project delivery is leadership. No matter where you are on a project delivery team, it is leadership. We may not always be the ones setting the larger vision, right? We may not be the literal Gandalf, but we have to lead our teams, we have to lead our clients. When the going gets really rough and people stop believing that it's gonna work, right? It's like kickoff, everybody's like, yeah! And then like 2 months later, everybody's like, oh God, I don't know if we're gonna make it, right? And you're the person who has to say, yeah, no, we are gonna make it. So people are freaking out and we're the ones that need to really keep our cool. So I've often translated Sam's words to Frodo as like my equivalent of that for my teams is, instead of I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you, is, well, I can't write the code, but I can order you the pizza, okay? I can provide the things that you need, or I can literally just sit with you because you have to work all night or all weekend. I won't leave you in that, I will walk with you. And that's another metaphor that I keep in my head a lot when I think about delivery and management in regards to the team, is that at no point during that journey did Sam ever leave Frodo's side. So he was like, I will be with you on this. You will never be alone. And I think that's the mark of a great manager and a great leader, that the team doesn't feel like you're asking them to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. So let's move now into what are the 8 features of how my leadership MVP, as I define it right now. So, ooh, you all right over there? Okay. Feature number 1, teach people how to treat you. I think there's been kind of several presentations today that have talked about this. Teaching people how to treat you is about the relationships that we build and maintain with our team members and with our clients, and ensuring that those relationships are healthy and not abusive. So every interaction that we have with our client or with members of our team, we're teaching them how to treat us. So with a client, for example, if they treat everything to us as urgent, do you guys have that thing where clients send you the email with like the 2 exclamation point, like the high priority? And like everything they send has the little like high priority. And you're like, if everything's high priority, literally nothing is high priority. I don't know what to do with all these exclamation points. So if my reaction to the client sending me 100 high priority emails is to respond to every 100 because I'm taking their high priority to mean high priority, I'm teaching them that's okay. And if I ever change that behavior, if I ever say, whoa, okay, I'm just gonna respond to you once at the end of the day, that's gonna feel like I'm taking something away from them. So it's important from the beginning to decide what are the boundaries that you're setting with your client or with your team members. If I work every night until 2 a.m. and I'm emailing my client at 2 a.m. or I'm emailing my team members, they expect to hear from me then at 2 a.m. because I have taught them, yes, that's how I'm working. So thinking about what are you teaching people when you're interacting with them? What are you teaching them about how they can treat you? The second part of this for me is how you treat someone that you don't need really shows who you really are. So several years ago, I was on a pitch, and Nancy was with me as well, and we were pitching this huge company. And we were up against a lot of like really big agencies and really big companies. And we ended up winning the work. And so we asked, wow, like what made you pick us? And there were a few things. And one of them came from all of the members of the team who weren't like the ultimate decision maker boss. And they said, you were the only team that looked at us when you were answering questions and not only at our boss. So we were answering questions to everyone in the room as if they all were important in some way, because they are. But it's really tempting sometimes to look at and only focus on the person with the power. And that's felt by everyone in the room. And it's meaningful if you are also treating well the people that you don't quote unquote need, who you really actually do need. Another example of this is an agency that I know where part of their hiring process, their interviewing process, is to ask the administrative assistant who schedules the interviews what they think of the candidate. Because what they found is that the way someone treats the admin, who they don't know is paying attention to how they're being treated, predicts how well the person will succeed in their culture, which is a very collaborative, team-based culture. And that when the person is really dismissive and disrespectful to the admin, it means they're not actually the right fit for the agency. So treating people well that you don't need is a big part of building relationships. Lastly, how you treat yourself tells us how to treat you. And Roishi talked about this in her talk as well, like recognizing when you need to disengage, when you need to take a break. My catchphrase for this is when it feels like you cannot take a break, that's when you absolutely need to take a break. And I have to remind myself of this all the time, right? You're like, no, I have to do this, and I have to do this. I gotta get it all done before X time. It's like, that I know is the time that I need to just go for a walk. That like I'm just leading myself down this path of being totally fried, right? I don't have any spoons left. I'm not gonna do anybody any good if I continue working. But I and many other people in our industry, we're problem solvers, we like challenges, and so our temptation is to just push and push and push and push. And it's really important to develop the muscle of saying, nope, this is what I need, this is a boundary. And there's two kinds of boundaries to think about in this that come from the world of therapy. So one is a protective boundary, which is what will I let in? How much will I let what you are doing affect what I have going on? The other boundary that gets more and more important as you move into a leadership role is a containing boundary, which is how much of my own bullshit do I let onto you? And the more you move into a leadership role, that's important because the way people perceive you and the power that you have you can inadvertently do a lot of damage to the project and the team. So my example of this is when I'm in a meeting at our agency, I have to be very careful about how I articulate what in my mind is a suggestion or a question, because often what is heard is, Megan said to do that, so I better do that. And when that happens, what I have done is I have robbed the team of their ownership of the outcome. Because why did they do it that way? Well, I thought it was wrong, but Megan said to do it. And then I'm like, no, I just was asking a question. But the way, you have to have that self-awareness as you move into a leadership role, that now the way other people see you may be different than how you see yourself. And those containing boundaries become more important, and understanding the impact that you may have on other people. So this is just getting good or getting better at self-care and understanding when it feels like you can't take a break. That's when you absolutely have to take a break. Feature number 2. It's important to cultivate in a team or in a company, whatever the sphere of influence is that we're talking about, cultivating a sense of mutual understanding and belonging. So let's start with understanding. The mutual understanding piece I touched on a little bit in some of my answers on the panel, which is there's this what is the conversation about in a meeting or any conversation? Then there's what is this really about? And a good leader gets to what is this conversation really about? So the other day, I was in a meeting with a client. I could tell she was getting kind of worked up about what was happening. There's a lot of change happening in her business. And she was asking questions that were like, how's this gonna work? And everybody in the room was jumping in with process talk. Well, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna have this meeting, and this is a deliverable. And I said, hang on a minute. Julie, what are you worried about? What's your fear here? And she was like, oh, well, I'm worried that this other business is gonna have influence over my product, and I'm worried that we're gonna get whatever. Her concern had nothing to do with the process. Her concern had to do with a fear that she wasn't gonna get the outcome that she wanted. And when we were able to move from just rattling off acronyms to her and describing deliverables, we were able to reassure her that yes, this process that we're moving you through is gonna get you the outcome you want. But in order to get there, you have to recognize that sometimes the surface of the conversation that's happening is not what's really going on. There's something else there, and you have to be the person to dig for that a little bit and ask, what do you really mean? What's going on? What's the deeper level intention behind whatever it is that you're asking about or yelling about, however that's coming out. The second part of this, the belonging piece, Shahina, in your comment on the panel, you mentioned this as what to tell your younger self. There's this Brené Brown book called Braving the Wilderness, and she has this quote that actually doesn't come directly from her, but is from these 12 to 15-year-old students that she was talking to, and she was asking them, what's the difference between belonging and fitting in? And one of the things they said really stuck with me, which is belonging is being somewhere where you want to be and they want you, and fitting in is being somewhere where you want to be and they don't care one way or the other. And I think we have all been in situations where we were fitting in, where we wanted to be there, but we had to hide who we were in order to fit in, and they didn't really care either way. They could have taken us or left us. I truly believe that whether you're talking about a tiny little project team or you're talking about your entire organizational culture, we have the power to create a culture of belonging. And the more we can do that, the easier it is to get to that mutual understanding, because I'm recognizing who you are, and it's okay to show up as who you are, even if it's very different from who I am. So starting to create spaces, again, even if I've been in companies where the larger company culture was toxic, but I thought, okay, I have a microclimate here on my team, the team I'm managing, and I'm gonna make a microclimate here that is different from what we experience when we're not all together. And that means encouraging people to actually speak their minds. It means making these decisions in a way that we all feel bought into them instead of me just telling everybody what to do. So an essential part of leadership and management is looking at how am I creating belonging on this team and this shared sense of accountability. Feature number 3, we've also touched on a little bit today, which is delivering good news and bad news at the same velocity. And this is a concept that's in our book as well. Another way of thinking about this is bad news gets worse with age. And I think of this as like bad news is not like a fine wine or a cheese. It's more like a diaper. Just wanna get it out of there. Does not age well. So on the management side of things, I think if you can prep people, whether it's your client or your team, for the reality of bad news along the way, then it's not so bad when it actually arrives. So I actually talk to our clients about bad news in the first meetings that we have, in our kickoff meeting, which feels a little counterintuitive because they're like, the vibe of the kickoff is supposed to be like, yeah, we're gonna do this. But it's actually the best time because they can't imagine not liking you at the kickoff meeting. And you're like, listen, at some point during this process, I'm gonna have to tell you something that you don't like. And here's how we're gonna handle it. Here's all the ways that I'm gonna try to manage around that and make sure that like something doesn't happen and doesn't go wrong, but it will. And when it does, I'm gonna come to you, we're gonna talk about it, we're gonna work it out, right? And in that moment, they're like, oh, you're so great, sure, whatever, bad news, whatever. Well, then 2 months from now, 3 months from now, I can go to them and say, remember when I said you weren't gonna like me? That's today. So let's talk about what happened and what we're gonna do about it together. And it doesn't feel like a surprise, like they knew something was gonna happen. And here's the thing, we know we have to have those conversations every time. Whether it's an internal product team and we're talking to the leadership team, whether it's a client engagement, it does not matter the size or duration of the project. Something happens along the way that we weren't expecting. So why do we act like the bad news conversation is a big shocker every time? Like we have to prep our teams and our clients for the reality of that because we know it's gonna happen. And the more we prep them for it, the better they're able to receive it and engage in a solution around it. My example for this is very American, so I'm going to like walk you through it if you're not familiar with it. But so this is Chip and Joanna Gaines. Do any of you guys know these guys? Couple, okay. There's this show in America called Fixer Upper. And this couple, Chip and Joanna, live in this little town in Texas, and they help people find what they call the worst house in the best neighborhood, and they help them fix it up, right? So real cute. So they help you find the house, and then they, charmingly fix it up and you love your house. Well, every single time, just like on our projects, they're like, yeah, it's gonna be 50 grand and you're gonna get this bathroom and this kitchen and this deck and whatever. And then they knock down a wall and the foundation's rotted or the plumbing needs to be fixed or whatever. There's always something. And so Joanna usually, which I mean, of course it's her that has to deliver the bad news. She calls the other couple and kind of walks them through like what's going on. And what I love, so if you can find versions of this show to watch here, episodes of this show, I would recommend it because here's what you can learn from this. You can learn how to deliver bad news in a way that is not overly apologetic and in a way that the client is able to engage in a solution. So what I see happen in our industry all the time is something bad happens, and when we have to go to the client to tell them about it, we're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I guess we'll eat it. We didn't know. We didn't estimate it right. And it's like, no. We estimated it the best we could with the information we had. Now we have new information, and I need you to engage with me on this new information and work with me on how we're gonna solve this problem together. And it's hard to find examples of how to have these conversations with that energy of not aggression, but just like sort of firmness, like, hey, we told you it was going to cost X, or we thought this was gonna take 2 weeks. New information. So now I'm thinking it'll take 3 weeks, or here's my idea, what do you think? How can we solve this problem together? How can we be engaged together instead of the client feeling like I am doing something to them? How are we doing something together? So next time you're in the States, Netflix, Chip and Joanna Gaines. They're also just like a delightful married couple. And I'm divorced now, so it's really nice to see happy married people. Okay, fourth feature, communicate with context and clarity. AKA short emails are a work of art. So when we are on delivery teams, nobody's thinking about the project as much as we are. Like literally nobody. I swear many times we are thinking about the project more than the client. Like I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, I've got this thing, I've got this idea. And so the result of that is that if we don't constantly put ourselves back into the shoes of the person we are communicating with, our messages can feel like we're picking up in the middle of a sentence. And it can be really disorienting, because to us it makes sense because we've been thinking about it. It's a continuation of what we've been thinking about for 3 days. To the receiver, it's like, what are they talking about? Why do I only have half of the information? So here's an example of this that I experienced a couple of years ago. And literally this has stuck with me. I can still feel inside how I felt about this beautiful email. So one of my roles at Clockwork is I review contracts. And so project managers, account people submit the contracts to me for a review. And this email came from a project manager who needed my input on this. So just like quickly break it down. So she says, okay, Megan, we're preparing to launch this integration. This is what we have in place. This is what we don't have in place. I had to revise it in this way. I had Angie's help. Angie was our director of technology. So I know she's talked to the director of technology. Tweak the SOW in bold. Can you review both documents, confirm my revisions, and let me know if these are approved? Links to both of the documents. Thank you and good night. So when I read this email, so first of all, let me tell you, do you want to know what most of my messages look like when people want me to review a contract? They look like a forwarded string 8 miles long that says something like FYI, see below. Thoughts, question mark? Like, oh my God, no, I don't want to read the 15 emails that you guys exchanged. Just tell me what I need to know. So when I read this, I was like, oh my God, I'm getting project managed and I love it. It was so great. I just felt like so cared for by this one email. And if you look at it, it just looks like an email, but I can tell that Brittany, the woman who sent this to me, she spent a lot of time on this. She took out every single word that was not necessary and gave me only what I needed. And going back to the kind of communication style thing that I referenced earlier, she knows me well enough to know that I need it to be short and quick. I've got a lot going on. I'm also her boss's boss, so she needs me to do something. But it's not like she can just be do this, right? She's got to kind of finesse it so that I'm not God, who does she think she is? So just the amount of thoughtfulness that went into this is really incredible. And here's the thing, no one's ever going to recognize us for putting this level of thought into our emails. It's going to be totally invisible to most other people, except maybe each other. So I always encourage people, when you send just a beautiful work of art like this, forward it to a friend, forward it to me. DM me and just be like, girl, you won't believe this email. Let me show you a screenshot. I used 3 sentences. Look at this. I'm totally serious. So much of what we do in delivery goes unappreciated because it's unseen when it's really good. And it's important to realize no, this is a skill. This is an art. And when we do it well, we should appreciate it in ourselves and in others. Because it's really easy in jobs like this to go home at the end of the day and be have somebody say so what'd you do today? And I'm I sent 100 emails and 8,700 Slacks, and I went to some meetings. That sounds not inspiring at all. But when I can think about it through the lens of what was I doing in all of that communication I was doing, how much time did I spend on that, which meant that the person who read it didn't have to spend a second longer on it than they needed to, and I got exactly what I needed. That's important. So this, for me, is about leadership and management. It's about effectively managing the people around you, and it's also about showing yourself as a leader who understands how to communicate with the audience that you're communicating to. Feature 5, don't suck time. So this is from Princess Bride. There's that machine that literally just sucks the life out of you. That's meetings, right? This is how most meetings feel. It feels like That's whoever is leading the meeting, that's you, and you can never get that time back. They've literally just sucked life out of you. But here's the thing. Meetings aren't actually the problem. I've seen companies where they're like, we banned meetings, man. We don't have meetings. And I'm like, okay, meetings aren't the problem. Poorly organized meetings are the problem. People not running meetings well is the problem. But meetings are actually necessary. They're often a critical part of our work. So acting like they're not necessary is not the right solution. And allowing ourselves to have hours and days of our life sucked away when we don't know why we're sitting in the room doesn't make sense either. So as a manager and as a leader, think about the meetings you're scheduling and why, and think about that overall meeting experience. So here's a way to maybe shift how you think about meetings. By the way, I will share all of these slides later, so don't feel like you need to write down, and I have links to all the things I'm referencing. I love this post by Mike Monteiro. He says, subtracting an hour from the life of another human being isn't to be taken lightly, it's almost violent. I mean, think about your meetings as an act of violence, potentially, against the people you're working with, because honestly, sometimes that's how they feel, and you'll think differently about scheduling the meeting. So it's certainly invasive. Shared calendars are vessels you fill by taking things away from other people. I'm adding a meeting should really be, I'm subtracting an hour from your life. So no pressure. But so here's what was helpful for me about this. This helped me think differently about my own calendar. And in this article, he's making a point about the fact that the UX of calendars is sort of broken in the sense that they do look like an empty bucket that we should fill up with stuff, without realizing that bucket's already filled with my life, with the things I want to do, with my priorities. And so thinking about how, instead of looking at that as a thing to fill up, or instead of looking at other calendars as a thing you should fill up, think about you adding something to that calendar is taking something else away. And is it worth taking that time away or not? Is this a thing I could answer over Slack or somewhere else? Again, I'm not saying meetings are bad. There's this article by David Allen who wrote the book Getting Things Done, if you're familiar with it. That's where the whole inbox zero mythology comes from, is this guy. So he wrote this article about why to have a meeting, and he boiled it down to 5 reasons, and I love the simplicity of this so much. You have a meeting for one of 5 reasons: to give information, to get information, to generate ideas, make decisions, or because of the magic of human interaction. All 5 of those are potentially valid reasons to have a meeting. And don't discount the importance of number 5. Like, sometimes it really is just helpful and important to get people all looking at each other, even if it's over a video conference and not like in actual real life. But I also would argue that some of the reasons on this list don't always have to be handled through a meeting. So if I show up to a meeting and the goal is give information, it's a fair question to say, could this be a report that you send out and then we discuss what we actually need to discuss? We make a decision about it. But I love this framework for, like, this tends to be the motivation for why we would schedule a meeting. And I use this in my own head when I'm thinking about scheduling a meeting or trying to figure out if I can get away with not having a meeting. It's like, okay, could I give that information in another way? Could we make that decision in another way? So I often use this as well to frame up the meeting before sharing the actual agenda or objectives. So I will say, this meeting is for me to give you information about X, and then for us to make a decision about Y. So that's why we're here. Everybody knows we're here, and if somebody's like, don't care, they can excuse themselves. Or like, decision doesn't affect me, I don't think I should be here, they can go. My last point on meetings is to focus less on the agenda and more on the outcome that you're seeking. So we have this temptation like, oh, I scheduled a 30-minute meeting or a 60-minute meeting, because it's this arbitrary thing that we do. And instead of feeling like I have to fill 30 minutes of an agenda, I want people to know why they're there. And if we get it done in 5 minutes, great. Take that 25 minutes of your life back. If it takes us all 30, fine. But focusing on the outcome or the objectives more than the agenda helps you with this, like, sucking less time. Otherwise, you feel obligated to fill that time. Okay, number 6. I'm running over. I'm gonna talk fast. Feature number 6, have the courage to stand alone. So at this conference, actually in 2015, on a panel, someone in the audience asked, who is the PM loyal to, the client or the team? And my answer to that question was actually our loyalty is to the project and to ourselves. So what that means is that sometimes we are in conflict with the client. Sometimes we are in conflict with our team. Sometimes we're in conflict with our own agency because we're saying, hey, actually, we should eat this cost for the greater good, whatever it is, right? In the role of being in charge of delivery, you have to have the confidence to stand alone. It can be a lonely role, to say, no, this is what's right for this project. And to shepherd people through that shock of like, no, I'm not only representing for you, team. Yes, you're important to me, but I also have to represent the client in this, and maintaining that effective neutrality. So it can be a really lonely place, but it's absolutely essential. The same is true of leadership. The more you move into a leadership role in terms of your title or your position within a company, the lonelier that role can be, because sometimes you have to make decisions that people don't like or don't understand, and you have to have the confidence to stand in that decision. So getting comfortable with being true to yourself and acting with integrity and understanding that sometimes that's going to piss off the people around you, and you have to be okay with that. This also, as a leader, is about, you'll find yourself in the middle of conflicts, and you'll have to mediate those conflicts. And again, this is true. Somebody asked the question earlier about like mediating the conflict on the team. Like, you have to be the person who can draw out all of that conflict and get people to disagree and commit. Disagree and commit. Your homework for this is, there's a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, very short, fast read. There's also at the bottom of this slide a link to a 30-minute presentation by the author that is just as good. And what he talks about is how to cultivate this sense of like conflict management on a team, how to build a healthy team that has high levels of trust, and how to be the person who's comfortable bringing that conflict out and getting people to commit to the outcome. And the importance, like, what I love about this way of thinking is that when we don't do that, what happens is we're in a meeting, I'm running the agenda, we make a decision. You can feel in the room when not everybody is on board with the decision. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? That feeling where you're like, yeah, we're definitely gonna do this, and like half the room is like, okay. Well, what that means is that when they leave the room, those 3 people who are like, whatever, they had something to say, they didn't say it, and now they have absolutely no accountability to the outcome of that decision. Because they're saying to each other, like, I knew it would never work. Well, never, they should have listened to me. So we as managers and leaders are never gonna get to that level of commitment unless we say, okay, wait, what's that about? You don't look like you agree. We need to hear your voice. What do we do? And get that conflict out in the open so that when people leave the room, they feel heard. Whether their suggestion or decision was the one that was ultimately landed on, they understand the one that was decided on, and they feel able to buy into it. Because a team, a delivery team that does not have shared accountability for the outcome is doomed to fail. Because you have some people thinking that something's going to be successful and other people who are checked out of it. So creating that sense of shared accountability is really essential from both the management and the leadership side. Take note of the leaders around you. So observe, actually literally observe good and bad leaders that are around you and take notes. Think about how you will do what they're gonna do in a way that's authentic to you. So one thing that I have learned is that I don't have to be like anyone else to be an effective leader. I'm gonna talk about Nancy for a minute just to embarrass her. So if you saw the 2 of us speak in 2015, like, she's an amazing speaker. She's an even better leader than she is a speaker, right? I sent her a can of Spam, for God's sakes, right? Like, talk about like lighting a fire in people. Like, she has the ability to say, let's go there, and everybody's like, yes, okay? She has a specific way of doing that is true to her. And I spent a long time in my career thinking the way to be a leader was to be like her, but I'm not her. And then that felt bad. I'm like, oh, I'm not as good as her because I'm not doing it her way. And eventually I realized that I don't have to copy her or any other leader. And I don't have to just read a book and do everything the book says about being a leader. I have to observe the types of things that leaders I admire are doing, and then I have to adapt that in a way that's true to myself and who I am. So observe the leaders around you and don't copy them, but think about what is it that they're doing that makes other people feel this way, good or bad? And then how do I do more of that, or how do I make sure I'm not doing that and doing it in a way that's true to myself? So one of my colleagues actually reached out to Nancy and I and said, I want to learn more about leadership, and I've been like watching you in meetings. And I was like, okay, A, dude, that's creepy. B, I'd be happy to talk to you. So these are just a snap. I'm not saying this is the definition of a leader, but these are notes that he took as he was observing me and Nancy in meetings and saying, like, I realize these are the things, these are the attributes of what I see in leadership at Clockwork, and these are the practices that people take on. And so he's doing this practice for himself of saying, how am I going to show up in these ways? And he also said something to me that I thought was really interesting, which is, he said, I've realized that I keep trying to show up as a leader here in ways that I showed up as a leader in my previous companies, and it's not working. Because leaders here mean something different than the other places that I've been. And I realized, like, wow, that's so true. We describe roles for almost everything in any organization, but we very rarely take the time to literally define, what does it mean to be a leader here? It's just this thing that's like baked into the culture. And so taking note of, like, what does leadership mean, and then what does it mean to you? Last feature, lead first, title second. Titles don't make a leader, actions do. So do the things first that you see and ask later for, like, whatever title or whatever role that you want. You have to be it before you get it. So my example for this is, like, right now my title is COO. And I was having lunch like 4 years ago with a friend of mine, or 3 years ago, and she was like, tell me again about what you do. And I kind of like described it, and she's like, oh, you're basically the COO. And I was like, yeah, totally. And then I went home and Googled, like, what does a COO do? And I read the description, and I was like, you're right. So I went to the organization, I went to Clockwork, and I said, hey, I think I'm the COO, and here's how this could work, and here's what I'm already doing, and here's why I think this title and this role would benefit us as an organization. That's a much easier sell than, like, well, I think I should be this. Like, be it first. Be it. And then it's easier to ask for what you want. So the way to do this is to keep a running list of your accomplishments. Ask people you trust to tell you what you're good at. Then when you go in and ask for what it is that you want, you have things to point to say, this is what I already do. That is the thing that you want in this other role. I also think it's important to ask people you trust to tell you what you're good at, because often our own skills and talents are invisible to us. When I first started as a project manager, for years, I kept asking myself, like, what am I going to do when I grow up? Because, like, any moron could do this job. Like, I literally thought, like, anyone could do it. It took me years to realize, oh, not everyone can do this. The things that I'm doing, the ways that I'm, like, leading a team, or the way that I'm orchestrating what's happening on this team, like, those are skills and talents that not everyone has. But because they came naturally to me, they were invisible. I just assumed that it was an easy thing anyone could do. So asking someone else will help make visible to you the things that might be invisible, that you might not even know you're good at because they come so naturally to you. Sorry, computers are hard. There we go. Okay, so recap, our leadership MVP, the starting place. There's many other things for us to do here, but we're starting with teaching people how to treat us and our team, creating understanding and belonging in the groups and teams that we're part of, delivering good news and bad news at the same velocity, communicating with context and clarity, short. We're not sucking time. We have the courage to stand alone, and we're watching the leaders around us, and we're going to be it before we ask for it. So I just want to leave you with this idea that no matter what title is on your business card, you're a leader. And actually, when the title isn't on your business card, you're leading in absolutely the most important way, which is leading by influence, not by title. And that is the best and the hardest way to learn how to be a leader. You're not relying on status and power, but you're instead inspiring people to follow you. So if you believe that, you will lead your teams to success. Thank you very much.
Like us on the panel earlier.
Yeah.
We just needed a fifth one, didn't we? Thank you so much. Meghan, you sat down. Did you not want to take any questions?
Oh, no, I can. I thought I was like going too long and you wanted to kick me out.
Oh, I'll do my bit fast, don't worry. Did anybody have any questions? Please do, because I just made it get up. It's Rachel. Oh, yeah.
That was really good. On the point about noticing leaders, I've just been observing leaders in my new place, and I've noticed that they're quite quiet, and therefore the office is quite quiet, which therefore sets a tone, because they're obviously emulating how certain people are. So I was just wondering if you notice a certain trait in your leaders that maybe is not necessarily as conducive to a team, or maybe the ways of working, how you might try and challenge that in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because so two thoughts. One is sometimes, like, what you're describing is not necessarily like a leadership choice that they're making, but maybe somewhat also personality driven. Like, they're just more introverted, and then they're not realizing that, like, that's making the other people on the team feel like they have to be that way. So I guess I would say some ways that I've done this in my career. When I was really early in my career, I worked for a privately held company, and the leader of the company was really bad at getting us to, like, be excited about what we were doing. Like, in almost these words, he would stand up at, like, the company meeting and say, like, "Thanks for making me rich," and we're like, okay. And so I actually went to him at one point and said, "You really need to do, like, a holiday party or something, because you're not ever showing any appreciation for the rest of the company." Okay, this also goes back to what, like, when I was, like, way young in my career, zero self-consciousness about, like, this is me. I was, like, probably 22, walking into the CEO's office and giving him, like, a PowerPoint presentation on, like, why he should have a holiday party. Like, the gall. But I did it, and he had the party, and it, like, helped a little bit. So I would say you can sometimes go to the leaders and say, like, is that an intentional thing? Because it's, like, I think people feel like they have to be super quiet, but I think we might benefit from a little bit more whatever it is. But I think you also have to have a reason why, right? Because for them, quiet might be perceived as productive. And so they're like, yeah, I don't want a bunch of, like, you know, ping pong in the office. Like, I want you to do your work. But I think trying to frame it up as, like, hey, I think if we had more of a sense of, like, camaraderie, like, it would increase collaboration. It would increase, like, the work. You know, Peta said earlier, like, speaking in terms that are meaningful to the other person is really important. So instead of just being like, this is no fun, I want fun, being like, hey, here's how a little bit more, like, interaction between the staff would benefit us as an organization, would benefit our clients. I hope that's helpful. I'm just making it up.
You said that.
Anybody else want me to make some stuff up?
We can make some stuff up over drinks upstairs. How about that?
Perfect. Yes.
So that wraps up today, actually. Let's give Meghan another massive round of applause.